afternoon. I'm Leah Markey, the Director of the Center for Renaissance Studies at the Newberry Library. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first conversation in a series devoted to race and dialogue, hosted by the Center for Renaissance Studies. The Newberry is an independent research library in Chicago, with collections spanning more than 6 centuries of human history in Europe and the Americas. We've been free and open to the public since 1887, and recently we reopened our doors to readers and visitors. The Center for Renaissance Studies promotes the use of the Newberry collections by graduate students and postgraduate scholars in the fields of late medieval, Renaissance, and early modern studies. Before I introduce you to today's program and to the series, I will read the Newberry's land acknowledgement. As part of our commitment to addressing the ongoing legacies of dispossession and settler colonialism, as well as our relationships with the city, the land, and the environment, the Newberry Library has written the following land acknowledgement in partnership with the Chicago American Indian Center. The Newberry Library is situated on the Aboriginal homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and the Illinois Confederacy, the Peoria and Kaskaskia nations. Many other nations, including the Miamia, Wea, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sakiwaki, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, and Mascoutin people also call this region home. Indigenous people continue to live in this area and celebrate their traditional teachings and life ways. Today, Chicago is home to one of the largest urban Indigenous communities in the United States, and this land remains an important place for Indigenous peoples. As a Chicago institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge this historical context and build reciprocal relationships with tribal nation on whose land we are situated. The Newberry is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today's event marks the first in a series of conversations about race and pre-modern studies hosted by the Center for Renaissance Studies. We hope you'll return on Friday, February 26th to hear Peter Erickson and Brandy Williams in conversation, and then again on Tuesday, April 21st for a discussion between Scott Manning-Stevens and Blair Topish-Caldwell. These conversations will continue over the next year in our center as we plan an exhibition devoted to race in the pre-modern world in conjunction with the Race Before Race conference at the University of Chicago in 2023. Thanks go to Lisa Freeman and Noémie Ndiaye for helping us to organize the series. We're especially grateful to Noémie for acting as co-curator for our upcoming exhibition and for being part of this first dialogue with the renowned Kim Hall as we celebrate her Things of Darkness at 25. So Noémie is an assistant professor of English at the University of Chicago. She works on representations of race and gender in early modern English, French, Spanish, theater, and performance culture. She's published articles in numerous peer-reviewed journals and various edited collections. She's currently at work on her first monograph, tentatively entitled Scripts of Blackness, Early Modern Performance Culture and the Making of Race. So Noémie will now take it from here and introduce Kim. This program will run about an hour, and if you're on Zoom webinar, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will answer a selection of questions towards the end of the conversation. And we'll also keep the chat feature on for discussion. Thank you, Noémie and Kim. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Very excited to be here.
So thank you, Leah, for this very kind introduction. I want to start by thanking the Center for Renaissance Studies at the Newberry Library for inviting us to celebrate Professor Kim F. Hall's Things of Darkness at 25. This is the first event of their brand new and exciting Race and Dialogue series. And most importantly, I want to thank Kim Hall for taking the time to join us this event, graciously sharing her time with us and letting us bask in her brilliance once more. Finally, I want to thank all of you, our viewers, for tuning in. I was informed that about 400 people registered to follow. Yes, this is the effect of you, Kim.
Or maybe I registered my mom 300 times. I don't know.
So 400 people registered to join in this celebration of your work and of your intellectual legacy. This is a momentous event, and I am deeply moved and honored to be part of it. I'd like to think of today's conversation as part 2 of Things of Darkness at 25. Last week, as some of you may know, the Society for Renaissance Studies hosted a panel entitled We Acknowledge Our Own, which celebrated this incredible book of yours. The event was recorded. It is available online on the SRS website, and I encourage all of our viewers to watch the video and to listen to the tributes offered by those brilliant scholars, namely Brandy Adams, Vanessa Corredera, Miles J. Greer, Mira Terrace, and Debapriya Sarkar. The celebration of our own continues this week as Kim Hall herself responds and answers some of our questions. So today's conversation is first and foremost an interview. I encourage our viewers to use the chat function and ask everything you ever wanted to know about Things of Darkness. Kim will answer some of those questions in a little while after I ask my own questions. And finally, for those of you who might want to live tweet the event, you know who you are, we ask that you use the following Twitter handle, hashtag uppercase TOD, lowercase AT, Arabic numbers 25, TOD at 25. Okay. Kim Hall needs no introduction, yet I am still going to introduce you, Kim, because it's easy for our viewers to lose track of your many accomplishments. Kim Hall is the Lucille Hook Professor of English and the Professor of Africana Studies at Barnard College, where she teaches courses in early modern Renaissance literature, Black feminist studies, critical race theory, and food studies. She is the author of Things of Darkness, Economies of Race and Gender in Early Modern England, Othello, Text and Contexts, and The Sweet Taste of Empire, Sugar, Gender, and Material Culture in 17th Century England, currently under contract with University of Pennsylvania Press. In 2018, she was the Wanamaker Fellow at Shakespeare's Globe, and in 2016, Diverse Issues in Higher Education named her one of 25 women making a difference in higher education and beyond. It makes her very happy to work with colleagues in Africana Studies and Barnard Library and Information Services on the project Feminists Coming of Age, The Magic of Ntosake Shange at Barnard College. The most recent publications include I Can't Love You the Way You Want Me to, Archival Blackness, which was published in Post-Medieval, a journal of medieval cultural studies just a few months ago. She also recently published, On Yearning in the essay cluster Shakespeare and Black America that she edited with Patricia Cahill for the Journal of American Studies in spring 2020. The latter are part of a larger project called Othello Was My Grandfather, Shakespeare and Race in the African Diaspora, for which she has received grants from the NEH, the National Humanities Center, the Schomburg Center for Research in African American Culture, and Barnard College. She currently has more work in the pipeline, an essay called Can You Be White and Hear This? The Racial Politics of Listening in American Moor and Desdemona, for the collection White People in Shakespeare, edited by Arthur Little. In the words of our colleagues in the field of early modern critical race studies who know her the best, Kim Hall is, I quote, the consummate scholar, a pioneer, a genius, intellectually capacious, original, field-defining, brilliant, ethereal, generous, and inimitable. Kim is inimitable. Their words, not mine. We are honored to be in your presence, remote, virtual, but your presence nonetheless. Thank you, Kim. In 1995, Things of Darkness launched a revolution in early modern English studies, when you took gender studies into an intersectional direction, and mobilizing the critical frameworks of Black feminism, you demonstrated that a new idiom of racial Blackness, subtly yet decisively moving between the aestheticized poles of darkness and fairness, grew across genres and across media in early modern England. That idiom, you argued, constituted a fraught attempt at negotiating some of the deep cultural anxieties caused by England's new colonial entanglements at the end of the 16th century. And that would have been more than enough for most scholars, but of course you didn't stop there. Things of Darkness shows in a definitive way that those negotiations were mapped specifically on the bodies of women, both Black and white, and implicated English women writers too, as those writers reflected and commented upon the implications for European women of the erotically charged male pursuit of colonial adventures. Things of Darkness left no one unscathed. I asked some of our colleagues in early modern critical race studies from different generations to tell me what Things of Darkness means to them, and I would like to share with you some of their responses. So I quote, "Things of Darkness is a work of eloquent mastery that launched a field. Things of Darkness was a groundbreaking transformation of early modern English studies. Things of Darkness is a canonical critical text that offers a prophetic program of action or blueprint of a methodology for the field at large. Things of Darkness takes an unexpected path, avoiding Othello, and nevertheless places the Black feminist critic at the center of an English Renaissance world of sonnets, cameos, and travel writing. It irrevocably established the rhetorical usefulness of Blackness in a startling, multidisciplinary way. Removing Blackness from its footnotes, Things of Darkness grounds, centers, and evaluates the idea of race in a way that models the scholarly rigor, the aspirational pedagogy, and the global breadth to expand those conversations, which bridge African and Western narratives, thereby revealing who we are as a field and as humanists. When I read Things of Darkness, I knew that early modern studies were more expansive than I had been taught or trained to believe. Things of Darkness has given me the permission to pursue research in directions that I would not have in the past, by demonstrating to me that I never have to divorce who I am from my work. Things of Darkness gave me the courage to be Black and study the early modern period. And it continues to demonstrate that reading through Blackness completely alters how we understand the early modern period. Things of Darkness is the book that enabled me to see that I could find a home in early modern studies. And the last one. As a high school student, I did a class project on colorism and cross-cultural contact between Europe and Africa in the early modern period. My mom drove me across town from our house to the University of Miami Library, where deep in the stacks, I found Kim Hall. Well, I found her early work anyway, the essays that would grow into Things of Darkness. Kim Hall's Things of Darkness lit the way for me and for so many others. I wouldn't have found my way without it and without her. There is no early modern critical race studies without this book. To me, and now I speak in my own name, Things of Darkness and its exploration of race making through the discourse of beauty is the book that launched 1,000 fields. I could spend ages talking about various aspects of the book, but our viewers are here to hear from you, Kim. So if that's okay, I'm going to move to the interview per se and start asking you a few questions. So my first question is about poetry. Things of Darkness covers an astonishing breadth of materials and genres. As anyone who's read the book knows, you deal with travel narratives, lyric poetry, drama, romance, and visual culture. I quote, not so much to focus on genre per se, as to use the perspectives of different genres to reveal clearly certain themes and tropes. And then you show beautifully how those tropes actually travel across genres and media. Yet one cannot help but feel that poetry, and sonnets in particular, get a little bit of extra love. Chapter 2 is the longest chapter. The appendix reprints poems exclusively to make them available for further study. And most book reviews from around the time when Things of Darkness was published marvel in particular at the work you do on the poetic tradition, which you call the site of England's earliest colonialist discourse. So my question is, what was and still is at stake for you in this focus on lyric poetry?
Thanks, Noémie. That's a fabulous question. Before I answer, I just want to thank everyone for coming and wish everyone health, peace, and some joy in this time. And to say hi to Mom. I don't know if I can see her, but it's such a great question, and I hadn't thought about it in those ways. But I think there are a couple of things. One is that I came to this project, and we can talk about like how I landed on race, because I got, I had to launch myself from someplace else. But I was interested in gender and rhetoric, and I had done all this reading. So I'm really interested in kind of like the primal languages that shape how we understand certain phenomena and certain categories. And sonnets, and poetry are kind of that language. And the other thing is, and this is going to sound, I don't know, maybe it won't be weird, but it is hard to do this work and not look for Black people, right? Actual Black people. I don't find them as often. MTI's, beautiful man found, so many. But if you start thinking, I really want to find some Black women, that language, which is highly, which is a lot about women and a lot about women's relationship to other, conception of beauty, that language like kind of, brings in Black women in a way, not in always great ways, but, and as we know from Black readers of Shakespeare, they find in the sonnets an entry point in a sense that, there could be some consciousness of a Black woman in there. So I think part of it was that, and certainly the poems at the end, which are kind of, my kind of, taking Elliot Tocsin's model for further study, imagine a Black woman, again, not in great ways, right? But it is the language that even now gets used, to talk about women's beauty, to talk about, with Blackness and that kind of thing. So for me, it kind of undergirds everything, even the drama. And I came to the field. So, and also, I think the other thing is just about me is that, I've heard Ayanna, and then, oh my goodness, I can't remember her name. Her first name is Phoebe, the director of the Public who did the Hamlet, talk about having this transformative Shakespeare experience in the theater. And my love of Shakespeare came as a reader of Shakespeare, right? So I did have a transformative experience in the theater, but it was really that kind of like reading the text and paying attention to that language that hooked me. So I think, so even as you see the poetry chapter, that's all about like my, wanting to, my sense of being a kind of readerly, Shakespeare person, not somebody who comes to it through the drama, right? Not like you, I mean, just in your work. And there was one other thing I was gonna say about that, but I can't remember it. Maybe that, and I think the other thing about, and this is going to sound also, maybe I'm going to stop apologizing for what I say. So, it's either Audre Lorde or Alice Walker who talks about writing poetry, because that's the thing that if you are a busy Black woman, a mother, that you can sit down and write, you can find moments of time for a poem that you cannot find for a novel, right? I'm not a poet, but I do find that in my life and in the classroom, I like to be able to sit with this thing and really dig into it and feel a sense that I can just kind of see, like kind of, get through the particularity and the wholeness. And you can do that with a poem in a way that you really can't with a play. And you can do it in the classroom. And so, yes, I think, there's something about, there's all of that kind of feeds into the sonnets. But it was also, the sense that the sonnets were and poetry in general, lyric poetry was the most recalcitrant, part, the place where people were most offensive about not seeing race, right? That if I could nail that, then I could convince them of the other things. But it was the poetry that people just really had a hard time accepting, right? Because it's about love and it's transcended and it's beautiful. And I read it to my girlfriend, and what are you talking about? So I think there's like a lot of things going on there that are partly kind of who I am as reader, but also like what I perceived as the kind of biggest wall to hurdle.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes this book and this chapter in particular so powerful is the way in which it allows you to really excavate a whole language, right? That functions even in the absence of the Black body. Miles J. Greer alluded to that last week. But to me, what makes the most powerful moment in my experience of reading the book is when we hit the last chapter on visual culture, material culture, where you show so beautifully how the same tropes that are operative in lyric poetry actually operate in the most material of ways, right? So even though you've evacuated the body, somehow we found our way back to materiality. And to me, that was just absolutely amazing. And you mentioned that you're not a poet, but you are a quilter, right? So material culture is important to you. Absolutely, we have some of your work behind you. So you're bringing all those forms of knowledge and all those practices together. Okay, let's move on to my second. I have many questions, and we don't have that much time, so let me take you to my next question, which is a little bit cheeky, but I'm curious. So if you were to rewrite Things of Darkness today, is there anything you would change? Is there anything you would do differently?
Yes. So now I'm glad Peter's in the chat so I can tell this story. When I and also give people some advice, which will be vexed for early modern race studies scholars. So Peter was one of the readers for Cornell Press. And he suggested that I change the order of the chapters and that the chapter on painting should be first and things should unfold from there. And he was absolutely right. And it didn't need to be a giant change, but it just like by the time I had gotten the manuscript back and the comments, which the readers were wonderful, I just did not have the steam to do it. And so I guess to transform that into some kind of advice is to not hold on to the manuscript so long. And you know, because now that I've been a reader of manuscripts, I've gotten a lot of things that need a lot more work, but it's the point where there actually could be a really good intervention. Now I say this with some caution because I know a lot of us have had this experience of not having readers that are like Peter Erickson. Like that was an extraordinary gift to me, right? And Mary Ellen Lamb, who were just amazing. And so if you do this work, you can get a reader who doesn't understand race theory, doesn't understand Black feminism or anything, and then you kind of in a stage of your book kind of get crushed. So there's this balance, but I do, I think that I know I was trained, and I think that the field has been trained to overprove everything, and that we could use readers earlier than we have. So I was gonna say, don't hold on it until you think you're finished and you have this ideal structure in mind. Because I was like, I kind of thought this through, and this he kind of upended my apple cart in the best way. So that's one thing. And the other thing I would do is that I would write it in a more accessible style. Like, this book had to do a lot. I was very conscious that it had to kind of establish me as a scholar, like really break through a lot of resistance. It had to have a critical apparatus. And Eric Burroughs has rightfully pointed out that this, even with the Black feminism in it, there's a lot of kind of white authority building around it in the acknowledgements. And he's not wrong, right? But now I think it's possible to write a book that's both scholarly and accessible. That, so now, like when people say, I want to read your book, I'm like, I don't think you do, because it's like, I think for an academic book, it's fairly readable and there are parts of, but it's also for non-scholar, like, oh man. So even though my hairdresser, or my childhood hairdresser read it and she gave it to people in the thing and they read it. So, because Black people will read each other. But those are the two things that I definitely would do. And there are other things, like when I read it, it's like, boy, you could have really pushed more on sexuality and gender difference, because that was a kind of living conversation. Val Traub and I were in seminars together. So there's things like that in the reading I would but then other people have done it, so I didn't need to, right? But I definitely would have done both of those things. And certainly to make it a text that was more accessible would have been really, really high on my list.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Just to make sure, because I misheard, which chapter did Peter Erickson say?
The chapter on painting. So, which of course I can't remember.
The material.
The material culture chapter. Yeah. That should have been first. And
then keeping the chapters in their current order.
Yes. Okay. It's been 25 years, right? So that my memory definitely was a material culture chapter, and then kind of build out from there. So one could do, material culture sonnets, or some different order, but yes, but to kind of start out with a splash, which Peter's essays also do. He kind of starts out with powerful statements and that kind of thing. I'm more of like, let me creep into it and see if I can get you there without you noticing where I'm taking you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. So Another question I wanted to ask you, and there I was inspired by the comment that Mira Kafantaris beautifully made last week in part 1 of Things of Darkness at 25. She pointed out that your work has inspired and continues to inspire everyone who does meaningful work in early modern critical race studies, right? All the distinguished scholars in our field, all the emerging new voices in the field have been inspired by Things of Darkness one way or another, because it is such a rich work. It has so many seeds, it plants so many seeds. So you have always been very clear and even adamant about the ways in which you have derived inspiration from the writings of Black feminists. And I'm wondering whether both before and after Things of Darkness, you've also derived crucial moments of inspiration from some books produced in early modern studies. And if so, which ones? So which books did for you what Things of Darkness did for us, or which books in early modern studies made Things of Darkness possible?
Well, like every word out of Peter Erickson's mouth, let me just say that first. So, and I wish Margot were here in this conversation, because she might, either confirm or deny my reality in graduate school, which was that it wasn't like Margot, I mean, here, like in the chat, in the talking to us. But anyway, she's in the chat saying stuff. That for me, the big interventions were more essays, anthologies, and critical collections, right, that were really transformative. And not so much single author books, although there is the book that shall no longer be named that Mira talked about. So, for example, Rewriting the Renaissance, which by the time, which I bought, in graduate school, like how, you don't buy a lot of books. I bought that, Phyllis Ratkin's cross-dressing essays, Jean Hart, like there was to me, a ferment of feminist work and essays that were just like eye-popping, like, oh, that showed that you could do work that was politically transformative. Now, like a lot of it didn't talk about race, and it took people like Margot and Pat to kind of do the kind of groundbreaking anthology that kind of would do that work that the other anthologies did. And Anya's book was coming out at the same time, and so that work really just kind of authorized me in a way that I'm hearing you say that people think Things of Darkness authorized them. And I'll say that when I wrote, speaking of being cheeky, when I wrote my dissertation proposal, I led off with a passage from Rewriting the Renaissance, which is in my office, so I can't show you how dog-eared it was. And because it was an interdisciplinary book, it gave you just so many tools for how to read a number of different Renaissance texts, like, as I do in things. So for me, it was just like I was opening up all the time. But I did say in my dissertation proposal, like I believe in the first paragraph, that book, in the introduction, they say they're going to talk about it's a intersectional feminist work that's going to talk about every form of difference. And they didn't use the term intersectional, and they list like a ton of forms of differences. And then I say, but they don't list race. And so when I go meet Maureen to discuss the proposal, and I'm like, okay, what's she going to say? Because she's one of the editors. And she just said, I can't believe we did that. And then she's like, we're going to do better, and you're going to do this work. And so it was a beautiful kind of non-defensive, like, yes, acknowledgement. And again, so if we're going to talk about white mentorship and white allyship, that's like the non-defensiveness isn't like a huge part of it. So, and there's any number of anthologies and essays I can name. It just felt like there were things, coming out all the time that were just kind of really demonstrating different reading practices. So I know Margot is here in the thing. People say Margot's here. I know she is. And I'm like, I want her to, So yeah, but Jokes is also kind of, weighing in on how important Rewriting the Renaissance was. So it was kind of books like that. And, I know this was about early modern, but I also want to say that Bell Hooks's essay and Talking Feminist, Talking Black kind of fed my soul in advance in a way that I needed later and didn't know I would need. So in graduate school, I did, the pushback I got was different. Like, I was not accused in graduate school of hating Shakespeare. Okay. And Bell Hooks had already kind of started talking about something that I found we all know, which is the loving critique, right? That there's a pleasure in analysis. There is a responsibility that, comes out of a Black tradition and a lot of different traditions of, kind of like embracing things with, critically, right? And so that was what I saw myself doing. And it wasn't until I got into my first job and the cultures wars hits that I was like, well, wait a minute, like that my students thought I had, were accusing me of hating Shakespeare, not the ones who took my class, but, and media accusing me of hating Shakespeare, and I even wrote an essay called I presented Shakespeare Association, what's a nice girl like me doing a place like this? Because I was so dumbfounded that the girl who grew up loving Shakespeare all of a sudden was accused of kind of being his downfall. And I think, that this is something that gets lobbed at all of us. Like, nobody spends their time on texts that they hate. Like, maybe not nobody, people might have some kind of weird relationship to it, but that we come to this and we come to each other into the field from a place of love. And that love we see in abundance when we're together as Black, Indigenous, people of color, when we can get together in those categories. But from the outside, when they read our work, it looks like we can't, that we, I don't want to go too far into it, but it is important to me to think about this question of love, and that I realized that having had bell hooks in my pocket was just really just a comfort to me, to think, okay, this is actually part of the intellectual tradition that I am, being part of, and that, my love is apparent to me and the people who can, who know me, and the people who can read through what I write. So anyway, that was too long. But.
No, this was great. We come at this work from a place of love, but I can't love this the way you want to, right? Love it on your own terms. I just a quick segue, because I heard you mention white mentorship and white allyship, and how important and crucial that was and still is for the development of this field. And I think it's a question that our white allies really want to explore. I think our white allies want resources, and so if you could speak a little bit about how you see this this unfolding, would be great.
I mean, and I can only speak from my experience, because we didn't have a field. I had we did. Okay, we had a field, which Miles and Dennis and all people are laying out this genealogy. But at the time, I couldn't go. I met Anthony Bartholomew just as I was about to leave Penn, right? And he was working on modern. He just finished his book, and then had moved on to something that was not early modern. So, so what I was gonna say? So there were a couple moments. There were moments in my graduate school career that now stand out, that I just accepted as normal, even though I had a lot of, let's just say BS, about a lot of different things, and I was constantly on the verge of leaving graduate school. My mother will tell you about long, tearful conversations. So don't think I went in as a raging success. All B's my first semester, director who told me I should probably leave the program, so, right. But so when I I had to switch my dissertation topic, and I had, but while I was reading for my exams, I went to Maureen again, and I said, I'm reading, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm going to lose the name and I feel really bad. The edition of Mary Ross poetry, where she, in the introduction, she talks about her performing in The Mask of Blackness. So I go to Maureen, it's like, what is up with this? In a quieter way, because I was really terrified of Maureen. But I said, well, what's this? They're in blackface? And she's like, thank you, it's Josephine Roberts' edition of Mary Ross. And she's like, I haven't thought about it in a million years. And, it might be about race. You should go read up on that. And that's very simple. But what I hear a lot of from younger scholars is that when they ask about race, they are told, no, that's not about race, right? And so I think one of the first things is like your ability to say yes. And your ability to then say, here's some scholarly protocols, and here's some things that might help you access what you want to access. But the other thing that I think is really key, and it's a high bar, and so let me just say, if you're somebody who is mentoring a person, doing this work, it's going to be really high. But there's one part of it that I think is crucial. So that, Maureen Quilligan, Pat Parker, Jean Howard, and I'm missing some names that I feel, bad about that, took on the responsibility of thinking about how what I was saying applied to their own work into the field. And, so Maureen started, kind of doing, trying to do conferences around race, writing about race herself. Jean Howard has been a phenomenon, in this, and, has really, so that they start and taking on kind of anti-racist practices, right? And taking on the responsibility for themselves, not making me do it with them, although we've had conversations clearly. And so I think part of it is that you need to kind of, if you are a person who wants to mentor somebody, you have to kind of commit to a kind of anti-racism in your scholarship and your and your your politics in general in the classroom. And that's really hard, and you decide for yourself what that means. But I think, and the other thing is, really like reflect back on your own work. Like, we would be really upset if a man supervised a old school feminist dissertation and didn't think it all about gender in his own work, that would continue to produce kind of masculinist things that ignored women, right? So I think, and it's the same thing for race. So, I think, kind of being a little non-defensive, being as non-defensive as you can, saying yes and having openness to different epistemologies and different ways of understanding the world. And Jean was, Phyllis Rackin as well. I mean, that they were kind of exemplary to me. Gwen Kennedy is a peer mentor who started working on race and thinking about race and teaching it, because we were in dialogue. And so to imagine a dialogue that's going to be transformative for both people, I think is the ideal. So
thank you. That is so important, and that knowledge is going to be so useful. Thank you, Kim. Another question, I'm keeping an eye on the time. So But another question I wanted to ask you is about, it's connected to your interest in critical genealogies, which is well noted, and Miles discussed it last week. So you're strongly invested in articulating critical genealogies that honor the roots of our field, honor the key role of Black feminists in the field's intellectual lineage, and enables, in turn, future generations to build monuments of their own upon those foundations. So given your interest in critical genealogies, I'd like to ask, what are some of the most precious things? What is the inheritance, right, that you want to pass on to the next generation of scholars in this field? What does it take to rightfully call oneself one of Kim's academic children?
Oh my God. So I've been told by another Black scholar that I'm allowed to call people like you, Noémie, because I'm like, people are grown. I don't, scholar daughters or scholar sons or scholar children. So so I think, I feel like you guys are already enacting what would be my ideal for the field and for each other. Like, the way that you started this event with talking about last week's conversation and making sure that people understand that we are a community, that we are building a critical conversation, and that we are supporting each other in this work. I mean, that is so key to me, that I love, to see it, and just to see it enacted in your everyday conversations, right? So that is kind of fundamental. I think, I guess for reading as a kind of scholarly practice, to kind of read with rigor, to close read with rigor, to read for what's in the text, and to not be deterred from encouragement to read over moments in the text, like to trust our instincts a little bit. I wish for you all more confidence than I had. There's some bravura in the book, but that's because people are like, you need to be more clear. You need to be, be more upfront. So that, and I think, the collaborative spirit, the movement amongst a lot of worlds, which, for me has, I'm not producing as much in early modern as like, people like Jyotsna and Anya, but but that the being able to kind of move in Africana studies, to move in the Shanghai world, has been really important and has transformed the early modern work. And again, I see you all doing that in a lot of different ways. And so I would hope that all of that would be part of what we see as early modern race studies, or a feminist early modern race studies, obviously attention to gender. But and again, I see the openness to students and colleagues and other histories in like almost every word you all say, like in Mira's talk and Vanessa's, the kind of like, oh, we learn from our students, from their reactions, Ruben's work. I mean, it's a kind of beautiful coming together of a lot of different conversations that we're all having, that then you are using to produce transformative scholarship. And as always, be anti-racist, whatever that means now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this connects neatly to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is a state of the field question. So 5 years ago, in 2015, you and Peter Erickson co-edited a special issue of Shakespeare Quarterly. And this is a very important volume that many of us have been teaching. And in the introduction, you gave us a roadmap to 2025, right? And you encouraged the development of the field in many, many directions. I'm not going to summarize everything. I'm sure most of our viewers are familiar with it, but you did mention fostering interdisciplinary work across literatures and visual culture, across different languages, across time periods. You called for the development of whiteness studies, a seed that is obviously already there in Things of Darkness. Presence studies as well. You want us to develop a more capacious understanding and vocabulary of race. You want us to think about contemporary performance and adaptation studies, as well as critical Shakespeare studies. And most importantly, as always, you urge us not to lose the political and activist impetus that founded the field. I'm going to quote just one sentence. There is much to be done here over the next decade. What will this discussion look like when we reach 2025? Looking forward to that time, we hope to see a revitalized, intellectually expansive, solidly established field for early modern race studies that attracts much larger audiences in both academic and public spheres. We also believe that new work within this field has the potential to make a relevant contribution to change on a wider scale with respect to racial justice, unquote. So that was 5 years ago. We're halfway through. and I'd like to ask you, where do you see the field now? Are there signs that we're headed in the right direction?
So I'm just going to confess that, Peter is the one who's like, okay, they're going to do this by this time period, because I'm less hopeful. But I think, so I think that halfway there, we're halfway there, right? Neither Peter and I saw the completely catalyzing effect of Ayanna Thompson, right? And the Race Before Race Symposia, right?
Yes.
Which launched us into the public sphere in a way that we had not been. Brought together graduate students, undergraduate, established scholars, that is trying to kind of grow with the field and kind of, I don't want to say bring in, but kind of note the linkages between what we do and other subfields. I'm very excited about the conversations that Lahua started, with critical Indigenous studies, and that Scott will be, that we are both kind of growing and self-reflecting at the same time. So in the terms of the things that are, for us, by us, I think we're doing very well, right? That, there's been interventions around gatekeeping. PMLA has been, acknowledged the gatekeeping. So that is, all stuff that I don't think Peter and I dreamed of, right? And that, everybody who participates in Race Before Race is, making happen. The other part, which is the conversation about race being a wider part of the field, is happening. But I see there's some disturbing kind of things about how it's happening that I actually have a confidence will, lay out. So let me just say quickly. So because of our political moment, there are a lot more invitations to be part of anthologies and collections and events and that kind of thing. but there's things that had already been planned way before this year. And so the scholars of color, the BIPOC scholars who get invited have less time to contribute, unless, some people might have like essays in the drawers. I don't. So, so we're not necessarily, being given the moment to show. So two things: we don't have the moment to show our own work. I mean, to put our best work forward, because the other people in the project have had 18 months and we get like 6 months or 3 months if we want to participate, right? So it's, and we can bring it, right? Deadlines aside. But it also means we're not at the beginning of the conversation that whatever that thing is trying to establish. Like they've already set the terms, and then we're adding race, which we know from Black feminism, the additive analysis is not what we want. So that's the part where I see we really need a lot, there's a lot more to do, but I do think, I hope that that race is now inescapably part of a lot of early modern conversations. Deparia's work showed that for eco-critical studies, Genealogies for food studies. So there's, I think we're getting there, but I just want to kind of give people a caution about, how we're getting there.
Yes, this is important, and hopefully the message is going out. Race needs to be part of the conversation from the very beginning, from the inception of various projects. I have a last question for you, and then we will be able to move on to consider the questions that our viewer has asked. But the question that I wanted to ask you is about the new work that you have in the pipeline. So I mentioned it during when I read your bio, but I would love for us to tell us a little more about either the Othello and African Diaspora Project or the Food Studies Project, as you prefer, and just hearing maybe a little bit how those connect to things of darkness would be wonderful. Or how
oh my God, the Sugar Book is the one that's most connected to things of darkness, and it tries to make a similar kind of intervention. When I was looking at paintings and material culture objects, one category of thing I did not include in the book was Black servants serving luxury food goods to white families. And I just became very interested in what is the relationship between their Blackness and this consumption: tea, coffee, sugar, chocolate. So it's later in the 17th century, right? But as I got into it, and I had a lot of false starts, and I thank the Newberry for their commitment to basic research where I could kind of work through those false starts, it became very clear that the book was going to be about sugar, because that's the base that makes all the other things palatable. But then it became, and now it is about how text about enslavement and about the establishment of slave societies actually render Black women and children, who are the largest, labor force, invisible. So it's about the production of the invisibility of Black labor and the production of white innocence at the same time. And it goes from kind of early modern cookery and that kind of thing. So I'm looking at the economy of sugar in the 17th century and the building of that and its relationship. And it is actually also about genre. So there's a lot, that's related to things of darkness. And so it kind of like, I had to kind of keep figuring out, what is it about? What's that question? And the questions kept changing as I got deeper and deeper into the text. And so there is at the end another exhortation to the field and what I think we've done now. When you asked that question, I was like, oh my God, maybe it's just I'm rewriting things darkness. I'm not. There's a lot new in there. So in any case, Othello was my grandfather's, also somewhat related to something I've just said, which is it was to remind me of my love of Shakespeare. And Othello, and Keith Hamilton Cobb in American War nailed it when he said Othello is urged upon us perpetually. So the minute I said I was working on race in the Renaissance, everybody's like, Othello, and I'm like, no, anything but Othello. If I can write this book and never mention Othello, that's what I'm going to do. I didn't quite manage it, but yeah, I was very committed to, this is not a book about Othello, right? And then Jean Howard invited me to the series, and she's like, you kind of have to do Othello. I was like, not really. So, and in that chapter, I have a chapter on appropriations of Othello and adaptations, a section. And I just got really invested in Black people's responses to Shakespeare. And Othello is one as a play that lets you get at a lot of aspects of Black history and Black reading practice and that kind of thing. It is now, it's now, actually, I'm not going to say it's now probably, it's 2 books. There's one that's been, that's commissioned by Oxford Press. I wrote the title down because I forgot it because I'm addled. Immortal Longings, Shakespeare Yearning and the African Diaspora. And you can see the influence of bell hooks in the title. And I've already been kind of thinking about this quality of yearning in Black relationships to Shakespeare. And so that is on Shakespeare appropriations. But but what I found so much that it's like blowing my mind. So the other one was supposed to be Othello Was My Grandfather, Black Feminist Journeys with Shakespeare and African Diaspora, that was supposed to be modeled on, Alchemy of Race and Rights, talk about well thumped, right? Because I was finding so many things that, little things that I couldn't turn into big chapters, but that I wanted to talk about. And it was going to be about my my travels in these various archives. It would then allow me to comment on, receptions of my essays and things like that. Are we traveling so much now? Not really. So I am rethinking that again, but it will happen. I have a lot of, it'll be a more kind of picaresque kind of journey through early modern studies. I hope fun.
Mm-hmm.
And will, display my love for all kinds of things. So those are them.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll look forward to reading all this new work. So we have a couple of questions from viewers. The first one is from Ayanna Thompson. Kim, can you tell us a little bit about your high school education in Baltimore? How did that set you up well?
My mother loves you already, Ayanna. But so I went to what at the time was the oldest public all-girls high school in Baltimore, in the country. And it was we were encouraged to be intellectuals in a way I didn't realize was unusual. And I see Richard Stryer asked about were there men who mentored me, Peter, so I'll say Peter Erickson, there were, Peter Hume's books, I don't know him. Oh my God, I'm getting distracted. But so it was a place that assumed that we were all going to learn and achieve. And, I don't know that is so true. At the time I went, it was predominantly people. It was a citywide school, but it had just tipped into being predominantly girls of color, right? Like I'm going to say, Mom, I'm going to say 60-40, right? And one of the things my mom pointed out at my high school graduation is that a lot of the white girls were getting the big sports awards, and the Black girls were getting the academic, higher things awards. But I had a teacher, Mr. Ray. I could take as an elective advanced writing in Shakespeare. And so Mr. Ray, and I also had him for junior English, just encouraged us to argue with him. We read Plato and we were like, what is this guy talking about? And he's like, so what's making you mad about this? And why is it? And find it in the text. And so he was so open to us having a loving critique and model that for us, and could, hear these young women trying to figure out where this canon, where it's speaking to us and where it's saying that you don't belong. He also was responsible for me seeing my first professional Shakespeare in New York. He and my mom, because he took us to see the Hollow Crown trilogy. He comes to class all excited and says, this is a group of plays that belong together but are almost never performed together. I don't know. I haven't seen it in my lifetime. We need to go and we need to see it. I'm going to talk to the principal. So in a way, I don't think it happened now. Our principal let this man take this girl with my mother and a couple other parents and chaperones for the weekend to New York to see the Hollow Crown trilogy. And it was astonishing, right? So that even though I did not go to college thinking I was going to be a Shakespeare scholar or even go to graduate school, that experience of working with Mr. Ray, that experience of high school just shaped everything I thought about what teachers should be. He was the first teacher to not use red ink on our papers. And my mother looked at the paper, she goes, this is a really humane man. He knows what that red ink means to you all. So now it's very common, right? But it was not something that I knew. So that space of being with, and the Newberry is, one of the things I appreciate about Newberry was it's not a cloister, right? It's a place where you see undergraduate students and you see people coming to do genealogy. You're just in a different environment. And so so being in a public high school that thought that we were going to go and change the world in good ways and that we were intellectuals, like, just meant everything.
Wonderful. And of course, one salient feature of Things of Darkness is that in addition to having this focus on, brand new hot research, it also has this incredible chapter about methodology and pedagogy. And very few books manage to do both things so well. So
thank you.
Again, kudos. Okay, we have more questions. So, question from Heather Hughes. Thank you for your work, Professor Hall. When I first encountered your book as an art history graduate student at Penn in the early 2010s, it had a huge impact on me and my scholarly interests, especially as one of the shockingly few Black early modernists in that particular discipline. Here's a question. Your chapter on visual and material culture was a revelation. Yes. And I've always wondered, how was it received by art historians at the time? Did you experience any resistance from that field, given your primary training in literature? Such a good question.
That is an excellent question. I'm going to say that, the scholars who were doing the work, like Paul H.D. Kaplan, totally supportive, really lovely. Diane Chris, really, and, who's retired from Brown, but where the resistance was that was really powerful and made the work really arduous was in the archives. So that when I went to, for example, prints and drawings at the British Museum, they literally would not let me look at the catalog because I made the mistake of saying I was working on race. Whereas I should have, used another term. But once I said race, no, you won't find anything in here. The image of the Black in the Western Art Project was so framed around art historians that I could not look at the archive for years. And then when I went on my own to great houses to see some of the things, they would be removed because they were being photographed by the image of the Black and Western Art Project. So that was really, really, just so at one point I was like, maybe I just need to give this up. But there are always back channels and back ways, right? I have to say I don't, maybe I had, and because, the thing is, art historians aren't on your job interviews and that kind of thing. So, but I experienced interest by art historians who were doing political work, right? But the archives were an entirely different matter. And those are run by art historians as well. So just
We're very excited. As you know, this exhibition that the Newberry is putting together for 2023 in conversation with Race Before Race, one of the things we're trying to do is bring art historians in conversation with us. So I'm really looking forward to that moment. I think we have time for a last question, a really important one from Farah Karim Cooper. What advice do you have for early career scholars of color who will inevitably face the roadblocks in their careers that their white counterparts will not?
Ooh, baby. Oh my God. Farah, why are you doing this to me? I think one of the things, a couple things. One is, again, this goes back to this, you have to be part of a community. One of the things in graduate school that I moved between isolation and not isolation. I had amazing friends in graduate school who are friends to this day, right? So I think it helps to have people who are white. I'm going to be blunt. White people who will share their experiences with you, so that you and that way you kind of get how everybody else is being treated. Because a lot of times I feel like it's when it's outright racist, what it is. But then there are these things where you're treated a certain way, and you're just like, is that what they do to everybody, or is that what they do to me? So I think, have your network, to be, kind of wide and capacious. And that, Carrie Ann Rockamore talks about, the kind of mentor map, that we should all have. and that map includes not just other scholars and kind of formal mentors, but it includes the people who feed you spiritually and psychologically, the friends you can call and say, girl, or, honey, what the hell, this happened to me, or this, so I think part of it is just kind of making sure that, trying to shore up your kind of human resources. And oh God, I can't believe I should say that, but shore up the community that you have that supports you and that you support, right? It's not a one-way thing. And that will get you through a lot. It won't get you through all of it, but okay. And don't let shame keep you from asking someone whether this thing that happened was appropriate, or whether you can feel some kind of way about it, and it's not just you. Because I think that we are also isolated in these different that we end up being like the one person graduate school doing this in our program, doing this kind of work, right? And so there is that kind of isolation. So, and I think, we're the like handful of people of color, and we're the odd one out because we're doing the early modern. So I think, again, just to reiterate, like, be careful for yourself and take care of yourself, but also don't be afraid, figure out who you can be open with and who you can have those conversations with. Because it's really important to just have your reality affirmed, even if you can't change your reality. I don't know. I don't think that answered the question, but
It does answer the question beautifully. Thank you, Kim. I think this is the right moment to bring this interview to a close and to thank Kim. So I just want to say a few words in conclusion, Leah, if that's okay. I want to say that Things of Darkness is the only book to which I will turn anytime I think I have a good idea, because I need to check, most probably the seed was planted in Things of Darkness. So I need to go back to it first. And I also, I want to share what Things of Darkness means to me personally. Things of Darkness is a book of formidable intellectual ambition that enlists all the different forms of knowledge that you have as an early modernist, as a woman, as a Black woman, as a feminist, all the forms of knowledge that you have in service of one powerful argument that reveals the existence of an idiom that has been hiding in plain sight in the archives, although it is ubiquitous, and it operates across a wealth of materials whose scope exceeds the scope of most monographs written before. It is a book whose intellectual ambition, I would add, is only matched by its generosity. That is the blueprint, that is the model, and that's what we aspire to do in our own work. Very few books have transformed early modern studies as radically as Things of Darkness. This book should be on every graduate student's oral examination list, together with the other non-negotiable classics that all early modernists need to know. If you teach a graduate course, you should assign Things of Darkness. If you teach an undergraduate course and your syllabus has either Black or white people in it, you should probably assign Things of Darkness too. Excerpt the book, show your students this interview. This recording, I believe, will remain available online on the Newberry's website, so feel free to use it as a resource. Kim, thank you for this marvelous, marvelous book. Thank you for everything you have done and you keep doing for our field. And thank you in advance for the next book, Sweet Taste of Empire, which I hope to discuss with you soon.
Okay. Thank you so much, Noémie. Thank you, everybody last week and everybody who's here. You can probably tell I'm just like weepy, but I so appreciate this. And I so appreciate this opportunity for us to, I hope, to celebrate each other as well. So thank you.
And thank you from the Newberry, from the Center for Renaissance Studies. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you for bringing us into this community and for this important call to action. I'm just going to leave the screen.
Come back for Peter and Scott.
Yeah, exactly. I'm putting the screen up to come back, take notes.
I'll be here.
Yeah.
I'll be here.
We'll continue the conversation on February 26th, and then again on April 13th with Peter, and then with Scott. We can't wait to have you back and to continue to talk about early modern race, pre-modern race. Thank you all.